Good evening, my friends. Tonight's case begins, as many terrible things do, with a knock at the door of 221B Baker Street. Not polite knock, not a nervous knock, but the frantic knocking of a man who believed death had followed him through the London fog. It was shortly after midnight when Holmes opened his eyes beside the dying fire and quietly reached for the revolver near his violin. Mrs. Hudson called from downstairs. "A gentleman insists upon seeing you, Mr. Holmes." A moment later, the visitor stumbled inside, rain-soaked and trembling. Without speaking, he placed a half-burned envelope onto our table. Across the front were 5 words: "You have already been warned." Holmes turned the burned envelope slowly beneath the lamplight, while our visitor kept glancing toward the window behind us. "My brother received the same warning," he whispered. "And where is your brother now?" Holmes asked quietly. The man swallowed hard, dead. At that exact moment, 3 slow knocks echoed against the glass. I spun toward the window. Across Baker Street, beneath the fog-drowned gas lamps, stood a tall figure in a dark coat, watching us, watching Holmes. Then the figure lifted one gloved hand and vanished into the mist without a sound. The visitor introduced himself as Nathaniel Blackwood, a solicitor from Kensington. His brother, Elias, had been found dead inside a locked study 3 nights earlier. No weapon, no sign of struggle, only strange ash symbols covering the walls beside the body. Holmes listened without interruption, his fingers pressed together beneath his chin. "You believe your brother was murdered because of this warning?" Nathaniel nodded weakly. "No, because of what he found." From inside his coat, he removed a bundle wrapped carefully in black cloth. Holmes leaned forward immediately. "A manuscript," he murmured. The pages smelled faintly of smoke. Their edges were blackened, as though rescued from a fire moments before destruction. Holmes examined the elegant handwriting, while the fire crackled softly beside us. For several minutes he said nothing. Then I saw something rare: surprise. "This is impossible," Holmes whispered. I moved closer. At the bottom of the final page stood a signature written in dark Victorian ink: Professor James Moriarty. The room fell silent. Nathaniel stared at us in confusion. "You know the name?" Holmes slowly looked toward the shadows beyond the fire. "Yes," he said quietly, "far too well." As Holmes turned another page, a folded slip of paper fell onto the carpet beside my chair. I bent to retrieve it. Too late. I had already read a first line: "Albert Watson will die first." A cold sensation passed through me instantly. Nathaniel looked horrified. Holmes snatched the note from my hand and scanned the remaining lines rapidly. "What does it say?" I asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he crossed silently to the window and checked the street below once more. Only fog remained. Then Holmes folded the note carefully and slipped it into his pocket. "We are already being watched," he said. We arrived at Elias Blackwood's house shortly before dawn. The study remained exactly as police had left it. Books covered every wall from floor to ceiling. The fireplace was cold, and across the wallpaper beside the desk, strange symbols had indeed been drawn in gray ash. Holmes examined them closely beneath his lantern. "Not symbols," he murmured. "Letters." "You can read them?" "Partially." Nathaniel shifted uneasily behind us. "What do they say?" Holmes' expression darkened. "They are dates." I felt the room grow colder. Dates for what? Holmes looked slowly toward the dead man's chair. For future deaths. The police believed Elias Blackwood had taken his own life. The door had been locked from inside, the windows bolted shut. Yet Holmes ignored the body entirely and walked straight toward the fireplace. He knelt beside the ashes, silently, then smiled. Interesting. From the soot, he lifted a tiny metal object, no larger than a coin. A railway token, I said. Precisely. Nathaniel frowned. My brother never used the underground. Perhaps not willingly, Holmes replied. Then he pointed toward the locked window. The killer never left through the door. I stared at the glass. Then how did he escape? Holmes smiled faintly. He never entered the house at all. As Holmes inspected the study ceiling, we suddenly heard footsteps above us. Slow, heavy. Nathaniel froze instantly. That is impossible, he whispered. The upper floor is empty. The footsteps stopped directly overhead. Then came the sound of something dragging across the floorboards. Holmes extinguished the lantern immediately. The room fell into darkness. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then, a voice spoke softly above us. "Leave the manuscript alone." Nathaniel nearly cried out. I reached for my revolver, but Holmes simply smiled into the darkness. "Our friend enjoys theatrics," he whispered. Then the footsteps vanished. At sunrise, Holmes discovered something hidden beneath Elias Blackwood's desk. A single ash mark burned into the wooden floor, perfectly circular, deliberate. Holmes measured it carefully with his pocket ruler. "Watson," he said quietly, "have you noticed the pattern yet?" "What pattern?" "The killer leaves signatures." He pointed toward the symbols on the wall, the dates, then toward the burned manuscript, the warnings, finally toward the mark beneath the desk, the circle. Nathaniel looked increasingly pale. "You mean murderer wants recognition?" Holmes shook his head slowly. "No." He stared at the blackened circle. "He wants obedience." That evening, Holmes sent me alone to the British Museum archives to investigate the manuscript's origins. The reading room was nearly empty. Rain tapped softly against the great windows overhead. An elderly librarian brought me the auction register connected to Elias Blackwood's purchase. Only 3 bidders had attended. Elias Blackwood, an unnamed private collector, and a third man whose signature made my blood run cold, Colonel Sebastian Moran. I returned to Baker Street immediately. Holmes was waiting beside the fire when I entered. He saw my expression and stood at once. "You found the name?" "Yes." I handed him the register silently. Holmes read it once, then very quietly said, "Moriarty's hunters are alive after all." Holmes sat motionless beside the fire for nearly a minute after reading the register. "Sebastian Moran," he finally said, "the most dangerous marksman in London." Nathaniel stared in confusion. "You know him?" "Unfortunately." Holmes rose and crossed toward the window. "Moran once served Professor Moriarty himself. After Moriarty's death, he vanished completely. And now?" Holmes looked out into the fog-covered street. "Now it appears someone is rebuilding the old network." A cold draft moved suddenly through the room. Then we heard it. Soft footsteps outside the flat, stopping directly beyond the door of Pew 2. Mrs. Hudson had long since gone to bed. The footsteps remained motionless outside our door. Holmes extinguished the lamp instantly. Darkness swallowed the room. "Do not speak," he whispered. For several seconds came only silence. Then a folded paper slid slowly beneath the door. The footsteps retreated at once. Holmes waited another full minute before relighting the lamp. He unfolded the paper carefully. Across the center were written only 4 words. "The second date approaches." Nathaniel looked horrified. "The ash symbols." Holmes nodded. "Yes." Then he checked his pocket watch and unless I am mistaken, someone else is already marked for death tonight. The second date written in ash corresponded to that very evening. Holmes immediately ordered a cab. Rain hammered the streets as we crossed London toward Westminster. "Who is the target?" I asked. Holmes handed me a newspaper clipping. "A historian named Edmund Vale, expert in secret Victorian societies." The moment we arrived at Vale's residence, Holmes stopped suddenly beside the gate. "What is it?" I whispered. He pointed downward. Fresh ash marks, circles, drawn across the stone pathway leading inside. Holmes' expression hardened instantly. "We are too late." Then, somewhere inside the house, a gunshot echoed through the darkness. We forced open the door and rushed inside. The smell of gunpowder filled the hallway. Edmund Vale lay collapsed beside his desk, blood spreading slowly across his shirt, but he was still alive. Holmes knelt immediately beside him. "Who did this?" Vale's trembling hand pointed weakly toward the fireplace. "The manuscript," he whispered. "They want the final pages." Holmes searched the room rapidly. Every drawer had been emptied. Books torn apart, paintings ripped from the walls. Someone had searched desperately for something hidden there. Then Vale grabbed Holmes' sleeve tightly. "Do not trust the man with the cane." Before Holmes could reply, the old historian died. Back at Baker Street, Holmes paced beside the fire in silence. "The man with the cane," I repeated. "Moran?" Nathaniel asked nervously. Holmes shook his head. "No. Moran walks with military posture despite his age. No cane required." He stopped suddenly beside the violin table. At that moment, Holmes pulled open a drawer and removed his revolver. "The cane may carry something." "A blade?" Holmes' eyes narrowed. "Or worse." Then came another knock downstairs. Not frantic this time. Calm, patient. Holmes checked the revolver. "Stay here," he whispered. The visitor waiting below was tall and thin, dressed in an immaculate gray suit. In one gloved hand rested a silver-headed cane. His smile never reached his eyes. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he said warmly. "My employer sends his regards." Holmes blocked the doorway. "And your employer's name?" The man smiled faintly. "He prefers anonymity." Holmes's expression never changed. "Then you may tell your employer that anonymous threats bore me." The gentleman chuckled softly. "You misunderstand. I did not come to threaten you." Slowly, he removed a black envelope from his coat. "I came to warn you." Inside the envelope was another list of dates. 3 had already been crossed out. Beside the 4th date was a name. Nathaniel Blackwood. Nathaniel turned completely pale. "No." Holmes studied the paper carefully. "The handwriting matches the manuscript exactly." The thin gentleman adjusted his gloves calmly. "My employer believes Blackwood should leave London immediately." "And if he refuses?" Holmes asked. The man smiled politely. "Then tomorrow evening he dies." A silence settled over the hallway. Holmes suddenly stepped closer. "You carry military ash beneath your cuffs," he said quietly. For the first time, the gentleman's smile disappeared. The man moved instantly, faster than I believed possible. His cane snapped apart with a metallic click, revealing a narrow, concealed blade. Holmes struck his wrist before the weapon fully emerged. The cane clattered across the floor. Nathaniel shouted in terror. The stranger lunged toward the stairs, but Holmes seized his coat. For one brief second, the gaslight illuminated the man's face clearly. Sharp cheekbones, pale eyes, a thin scar beside the mouth. Then he tore free and fled into the fog outside Baker Street. Holmes picked up the fallen cane slowly. Hidden inside the silver handle was a tiny compartment filled with gray ash. Holmes spent the entire night examining the ash beneath his microscope. At sunrise, he finally spoke. "This is crematorium ash." Nathaniel looked sick. "You mean human remains?" Holmes nodded. "The killer marks every warning using the ashes of the dead." Between the pages, hidden almost invisibly, he discovered an embossed symbol, a black circle crossed by a single silver line. "The same mark," I whispered. "The circle beneath Elias Blackwood's desk." Holmes stared at the emblem carefully. "Yes." Then his voice lowered. "This is not one murderer, Watson. It is an organization." Late that evening, Holmes led us beneath London once more. An abandoned railway tunnel near Aldgate had appeared repeatedly within the manuscript's notes. The deeper we walked, the colder the air became. Dust covered the tracks untouched for decades. Then Holmes suddenly raised his lantern. Ahead of us stood a metal door built directly into the tunnel wall. Upon it was painted the same black circle symbol. Nathaniel stepped backward nervously. "What is this place?" Holmes examined the lock silently. Then he said, "Something I shall never forget. This, I believe, is where Moriarty planned for his empire to survive after death." And slowly, the door began opening from the inside. The iron door creaked inward slowly. Warm light spilled across the tunnel floor. Holmes raised his revolver immediately. Inside stood an elderly man, holding an oil lantern, thin, gray-haired, calm beyond reason. "I wondered when Sherlock Holmes would finally arrive," he said softly. Nathaniel whispered beside me. "You know him?" Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Yes." The old man smiled faintly. "My name is Adrian Vale, brother to Edmund Vale." The chamber behind him stretched deep beneath London, lined with shelves of documents, maps, and strange black ledgers. Then Adrian quietly added, "Professor Moriarty built this place himself." The underground chamber resembled a hidden library. Dust-covered files filled iron shelves from floor to ceiling. Holmes moved carefully among them, scanning labels rapidly. Government records, bank accounts, names of politicians, military reports. Nathaniel stared in disbelief. "This is blackmail." "No," Holmes replied quietly. "Control." Adrian Vale placed the lantern upon a table. "Moriarty understood something England never did," he said. "That secrets are worth more than gold." Then he opened one ledger slowly. Inside were dozens of names, some crossed out, some circled in ash, and at the bottom of the newest page, Sherlock Holmes. Adrian explained everything calmly. After Moriarty's death at Reichenbach Falls, several loyal followers preserved his network in secret. The manuscript was never meant to be sold. Elias Blackwood had stolen it accidentally during a private estate auction. "And the murders?" I demanded. Adrian lowered his eyes. "Necessary." Holmes stepped closer. "Colonel Moran is alive then?" Adrian nodded once. "He leads what remains of the organization." Nathaniel looked horrified. "You mean Moriarty's empire still exists?" Adrian gave a tired smile. "Mr. Holmes destroyed the professor." His eyes drifted toward the shelves. "But ideas are harder to kill." A sudden metallic sound echoed through the chamber's ceiling. Holmes reacted instantly. "Down!" A gunshot exploded overhead. Glass shattered beside us. The lantern fell. Darkness swallowed the room. Nathaniel cried out. Another shot struck the wall inches from Holmes' head. "Moran!" Holmes hissed. Even in darkness, the colonel's aim remained terrifyingly precise. Holmes dragged me behind a stone pillar. High above us, hidden within the tunnel rafters, came the slow sound of footsteps repositioning carefully, patiently, like a hunter stalking trapped animals. Then Moran's voice echoed softly through the darkness. "Good evening, Holmes." Moran never showed himself. Only his voice moved through the darkness overhead. "You should have left the dead buried, Holmes." Holmes remained perfectly still behind Pet. "You inherited Moriarty's arrogance," he replied calmly. A quiet laugh echoed through the chamber. "No, I inherited his patience." Another shot rang out. Adrian Vale collapsed instantly beside the shelves. Nathaniel shouted in horror. Holmes fired once toward the rafters. Silence followed. Then came retreating footsteps above us, fast, controlled. Holmes immediately stood. "He is escaping through the upper tunnels." Then he turned sharply toward me. "Watson, stay close." We pursued Moran through abandoned railway tunnels beneath the city. The darkness seemed endless. Ahead of us echoed distant footsteps and the occasional metallic scrape of Moran's rifle against brick. Holmes moved astonishingly fast, despite the uneven ground. "He knows these tunnels better than anyone alive," I warned. "Yes," Holmes replied, "but tonight he is running." At a tunnel junction, Holmes suddenly stopped. Fresh ash marks covered the wall. A circle crossed by a silver line. Beneath it, written hurriedly in chalk, "One of you leaves alive." Then somewhere ahead, a train whistle thundered through the darkness. We emerged beside an active underground line. Moments before a train burst roaring through the tunnel. Steam and sparks filled the air. Across the tracks stood Colonel Sebastian Moran himself, tall, motionless, rifle in hand. His pale eyes remained fixed entirely upon Holmes. "At last," Moran said quietly. Holmes stepped forward. "Alone. You lost when Moriarty fell." Moran smiled faintly. "No, Holmes." He slowly raised the rifle. "We merely became invisible." The approaching train screamed closer between us. For one brief second, Moran's figure vanished behind steam and steel. Then gunfire erupted through the tunnel. I heard Holmes fire twice. Then came a terrible cry from the darkness ahead. The train thundered past us. Smoke rolled through the tunnel. When visibility returned, Moran was gone. Only his rifle remained beside the tracks. Nathaniel pointed upward suddenly. There, far above us, Moran climbed an iron maintenance ladder toward the surface exits. Holmes pursued immediately. The old ladder groaned dangerously beneath their weight. Then Moran turned briefly at the top. For the first time, fear crossed his face. "Holmes," he whispered. The ladder bolts snapped loose from the wall, and both men vanished into darkness below. I reached the collapsed ladder seconds later. Dust filled the shaft beneath us. "Holmes," I shouted. No answer came. Then, somewhere far below, a faint voice echoed upward. "Watson." "Lantern." Nathaniel lowered the light carefully into the shaft. Holmes clung to a broken support beam nearly 30 feet below us, one-handed. Beneath him stretched open darkness, and hanging from Holmes' other arm, terrified and slipping, was Colonel Moran himself. Moran stared upward in disbelief. "Why save me?" he gasped. Holmes' face remained cold and exhausted. "Because," he said quietly, "I am not Moriarty." 3 days later, the tunnels beneath London were sealed by the government, and the remaining followers of Moriarty disappeared into Europe like mist. Holmes burned the Blackwood Manuscript himself inside the fireplace of 221B Baker Street. Page by page, secrets vanished into ash. I asked him that evening whether Moriarty had truly planned for his empire to survive beyond death. Holmes stood silently beside the fire before answering in a low voice. Men like Moriarty never seek immortality, Watson. He watched the last page curl black within the flames. They simply teach others how to continue the darkness.